Welcome, everybody. We are going to be working on Unit 6 this evening, and we're going to begin by looking at some of the concepts here. The first thing I'll say as I kind of move through this material, some stuff I will bring up on screen because I have a lot of reference materials here. Some of it I expect for you to go through and read through it fully and watch all the videos attached to it, by the way. Um, and just remember, this is in lieu of having a textbook for this course. So these are reference materials, which I consider important. The general goal here is basically to talk about charting and graphing in Excel. Um, this will not be the end all be all kind of tutorial that you might be hoping for if you're looking for like the nuances of every single type of charting option and how to do it. It's really kind of to give you an overview of how this works and to introduce you to the tools, and then also talk about um, what I think are probably some of the more important visualization formats for presenting data, which is why we tend to see those types of visualizations most often. And when we talk about those, typically it's going to be the ones you see listed here: line charts, uh, bar charts, pie charts, and scatter plots are typically the ones that you see the most of. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to start clicking through some of this content. So like when we click into this first little area here, it takes us to a PDF of an article. And you can tell I was looking at this a little bit earlier. And this is one that was from about 5 years ago. And what this author had done is what he thought were the most useful types of visualizations and why data analysts tend to use those over and over again, because apparently, uh, he feels that these are the most impactful and speak the message most directly, right? And so you see, like even like the snapshot here um, is what are you seeing? You're seeing what we would typically call a bar chart, right? This is a very typical format for a bar chart with a kind of an inverse trend line laid over it, and then you see these line charts as well. So that's what those are. He basically identified what he thought were, the most useful charts, at least at the time when the article was written. And I don't think this list really has changed much, but every once in a while, um, some of the visualization tools will add a new type of chart. And you're like, that's kind of interesting. Whether or not it's useful is a whole separate thing. All right. I do want you to notice that the ones that are listed at the very top are arguably probably the most important and most useful ones, and therefore probably the ones you're going to use most often. And I would, basically look at like from number at least from number 5 and above, but maybe all the way down to number 7. I think those are relatively common types of charts that we see often, right? To just kind of talk about these very quickly as an overview, a scatter plot is when we are taking a piece of information that typically has two key data points. So, for example, I know Christopher has a video embedded in the course here where he does an example of a scatter plot where he's looking at the height and weight distribution of people, right? So, for example, um, the point is, if I'm a given height and then I look at my weight as well, those are two pieces of information. One might sit on the x-axis, one might sit on the y-axis, and there's kind of a correlation basically between. So basically, generally, if you're taller, you tend to weigh more, and if you're shorter, you tend to weigh less. Now there are people that break those rules because we can have very heavy people that are very short or very thin people that are very tall. But generally speaking, if you're roughly an average height and weight, it kind of forms a trend. And what you notice with the scatter plot is that the attempt is to plot both pieces of information. I don't know what this bottom indicator is here. Oh, the relationship between house price and land area. So the more land area you have, you typically pay more, but that's not always the case, right? Sometimes you can be like in a high demand area and have a very, very small lot and the price is really high. And that happens in the city all the time, right? But generally speaking, if you were to spot a trend on this, right, and this is one of the tools that we use with scatter plots and all data tools, is there's sort of a line, and I'm going to annotate here a little bit, right? There's sort of a line that goes kind of like this through the data, and I'm approximating, but generally more land, the price tends to go up a little bit, generally. So that would be an example of a scatter plot and the trend line put over the scatter plot. And that's going to be important for us as we're kind of moving forward here. There's also what we call line plots or line charts. And sometimes, for example, we will plot multiple pieces of information on a line chart so you can see the differences between things. And notice the color coding, right? So we have, for example, here, these are dates from 1990 up until 2012, and it shows US exports to China versus US imports from China, right? And it doesn't take a genius to figure this one out. It's like, oh my God, we import a lot of stuff from China. Why? Because the price is lower. We'll see what the tariffs do to that, but you know, why did it dip in 2009 and 2010? It also dipped in China a little bit. Well, that's when we had our Great Recession. So the economy kind of slowed down and crashed a little bit, and then we recovered. And of course, this chart caps out of 2012, but that's a line chart. But you can take, you know, multiple pieces of information, and you could imagine like US exports to Canada or US imports from Mexico or whatever thing you want to put in here, and you could overlay multiple data sets. That's why line charts are often pretty useful. We also have the what we call column charts or vertical bar charts, right? A very common one as well. But this one is maybe a little harder to read. I'll give it another click of zoom here. Maybe close the sidebar, but you can see that they're comparing um, coronavirus cases from different countries, the number of them, right? And there's some color coding, right? So like yellow is more intense, right? According to the little diagram on the side here, blue is a little more mellow. And as you would predict, you know, and this must have been really early in the pandemic. I don't know if you guys remember, but like Italy was getting hit really hard at first, and China was getting, you know, so and then you look at all the other nations and how many cases they have. And this is just a snapshot of a picture in time. We don't know what exact time period it is, but I'm sure that if you wanted to find that data, you could. Right. We also have horizontal bar charts. So you have ones that go the other way. They go from left to right or whatever. And this one's comparing different categories. I'm not really sure what they mean by nominal categories here, but you know, they're doing a comparison between government, nonprofit, foundation, consulting, and other. And these numbers, I'm not sure what they mean, but you can see the relative values, right? So like there's more of a bar if there's more value. There's a visual involved. Now I want you to think about this. Could you have done any of these visualization formats so far using scatter plots? Because scatter plots are really kind of the base thing. Because keep in mind here, we chart these things, so we assume there's an x-axis like we do like in number, you know, like in mathematics, and there's a y-axis. We're only showing the top right quadrant of a graph, right? It's usually one that makes sense for visualizations. But this is generated by two data points, like whatever this data is here and whatever that data is there, and then we just plot it on the thing. But in truth, a line plot is the same thing. We're just connecting the spaces in between, right? So in 2007, I mean, I'm not sure if they're monitoring it throughout the year. Perhaps they are. But in 2007, maybe the only data point was this one and then that one. I'm seeing a little like shape in there. So maybe there were more data points. We're just not seeing them. But the more data points you have, the more of a continuous line you can make. Bar charts the same way. This could maybe be represented by one dot up here, or this one dot right here. We use the graphic fill-in to make it more impactful, basically. This is the visualization piece, right? You know, how do we show that China and Italy had a lot? Just putting a dot up here might not be as meaningful as having a bar chart and changing the color, making it more intense and noticeable, right? So it's both like visually apparent and colorly apparent. You always have to be careful with doing colors, by the way, because we have this perception that people that see normally that everybody can see the colors. Okay, guys, you know, we as a gender tend to become more colorblind than women do. Some of you might not be able to see that the top part of this is orange and the bottom part is blue. Or maybe you do, but you perceive it as different shades of gray or something else. So that's kind of one thing I always kind of caution about charting too, is don't make the assumption everybody can see in color. You want to do it, want to go even further, don't make the assumption that people, reading your website or app or whatever you're creating can even see. There are people that can't see, right? Or are very, very visually challenged. So that's the thing to consider. Now, this is an area chart. So really, we're looking at, the top edge of the orange data is one set of data. The top edge of the blue data is one set of data, but they're making it more impactful by coloring in the ranges. So here they're showing fossil fuel production, right, versus total energy consumption. This is not a good chart, right? So what we're seeing is we're consuming more than we're creating. Now, I don't know if this is one that explains how we're using fuel here in the US. So we're using more fuel than we're generating here. Not a good formula for economic success, right? You would hope that you could maybe generate more fuel than what you're consuming and maybe sell it to somebody else, because we got to pay for all the stuff above. So as this space between the blue data and the orange data grows, we're paying more out of pocket to get that fuel. These are the kind of things. And does the shaded in orange area make that data more impactful? That would be the hope, right? So you're trying to convey a message. And this is the other part of charting and graphing, is you're trying to convey a message with what you're seeing, right? So and I think that's really important. And so sometimes these types of visualizations really they choose certain formats because they're more visually impactful, right? Because they want to, I'm not going to say shock and awe, but maybe that is the right terminology here. Sometimes, if you want to, scare people about COVID, you look at the chart and go, oh my God, right? Or maybe not. Another type of chart, and this is one that's kind of been gaining some prevalence over the years, is what we call the bubble chart. And what this one does is it not only shows how much data, but it shows it in a different type of way. Like the impact is because of the size of the circle. Some circles are small, some are large, and it's kind of a scatter plot, it says, where the size of the bubble defines the value of the third variable. So there's three variables that play here. This is kind of interesting. So we have something on the X, something on the Y, and then a third dimension that, in a two-dimensional format, because most visualizations are two-dimensional, we can't really visualize that. So it's kind of like width, height, or width and length and then height. So this would be it's farther up, so that's more impactful, but it's also much more of whatever that third ingredient is. They're not really telling us here. They're just kind of showing us this in a very generic format. Another one that's been popular for a very, very long time is the pie chart, right? Here's another one, relies a lot on color, but a good pie chart, if it's well designed, will also have little snippets of information. So for example, sometimes they'll indicate numbers or percentages or labels that match up. But methods of traveling to school, walking, car, bus, cycle, train, and taxi, and I assume these are the number of people doing, right? And then hopefully people can see the colors. I would say if I was putting this chart together, I might put the number in there, and but I might also say walking right here, so that if somebody's looking at it, they can still see the dividers. But if they can't see the colors, it's like a whole thing, right? But relatively speaking, we really don't know. I mean, like in terms of percentages, how many people or what percentage 8 people is of the total population. I guess I could add everything up and figure it out and verify it and then go, oh, it's probably a little over 25%. How do I know that? Because it's a little bit larger than 1/4 of the circle, right? Like if I was splitting that, like this is a pizza and I'm splitting it between 4 people, person with this piece is getting a little bit bigger piece, right? But this shows relative values. Once again, the goal is to be visually impactful, to show how much is being attributed. Some other newer formats, and these aren't all of them, by the way, but these are some of the ones that are kind of starting to creep up now that people are using, are what we call the waffle chart or the square pie chart. And we're basically doing the same thing. We're color coding the amount of stuff that we're putting into the visualization relative to its impact on size. We tend to put the larger things at the bottom, and as we go up, they decrease in size. And then, you see like these areas. And so basically what this is showing, like if you sell 3 different products, how much of each you're selling graphically. And the one on the bottom is the one you're selling the most of. So this one's got more products, so you can see more colors, right? Once again, I always get concerned about the color issue. We do have these combination plots too. These are kind of interesting ones as well. And this is where we take a look at, once again, additional dimensions of data that can't be represented in a 2-dimensional format. So for example, I have an X and a Y axis again. So one of these must be like a year or a period. One of these is a value. But then within that period, I have 4 different things I'm concerned with that all have their own unique values in that dimension, right? So we call that a dimension technically, right? So it's another value generation. And then its relative size based on the whole is displayed here. They can be horizontal or vertical, but fit into the bar chart format. There's also this mosaic plot approach. This is kind of like the waffle thing, but not exactly. But the concept is that you can quickly look at something, see how much relative size it has, and it applies, relative to certain decades in time. So there's, once again, more than one dimension of data being represented here. There's an X and a Y, but there's also apparently a Z, because we're looking at the individual values for each one of these things. There's many other chart formats, by the way, but those are some of the key ones that I think are very useful in knowing. Now, this link here, I'm gonna go ahead and play this one. I'm gonna pause the recording for this that I've been learning. Not good to put Microsoft videos in your thing because they flag them on YouTube. So I'm going to pause for a moment. All right. So as we just saw from that quick little Microsoft video, putting a chart in Excel is actually very, very simple. You highlight your data set, you go to insert, you choose your chart type. There's pre-configured ones, and often those work well. And for a lot of the needs that people have in working with data, that is absolutely a fine approach. Right? It's simple, it's to the point, it often is just enough information. And then you can also, as we saw in the video, you can drop the chart on there, you can resize it, it basically is a graphic at that point. And you can also go in there and insert things like trend lines. You can also change the colors of things, the labels on the axes, the title on the chart, the colors that you use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that can be tweaked after the chart is created. There's kind of like a whole group of people that specialize in doing that, by the way. But let's move on here. So watch that video from Microsoft if you haven't already. And then if you could at some point, this is a video series from LinkedIn Learning that does go through and talks about kind of a much more in-depth approach as to what we just saw in that 1 minute video. This is probably a half hour, 45-minute total watch time going all the way through the whole thing. And it shows you how to work with a bunch of different chart types, how you do it, what tools to use, etc. So highly recommended viewing. So please do that. I also have this link here. And so I'm going to kind of pull this up and all right, I'm going to go right up to the top here. So this comes from this author here. And this is, we're borrowing this from one of his publications, right? So let's give him kudos here. Some people watching the video. But what he's doing in this thing is he's talking about when to use certain types of chart. Why are some charts better for some information than others, and why do people select certain types over others? And he goes through this whole thing about it. And this is a pretty in-depth piece. There's many pages to this. I'm just very briefly going to kind of flow through this so you can kind of see some of the points. So these are kind of about the main topics in here, right? You know, like, and I particularly like when to use portions of it. Like when do you want to use a scatter chart, when a pie chart, when a stack chart, and he'll give you kind of the scenarios that fit with those. Sometimes it's really driven by the amount of data, and once again, I'm going to use the word dimensions of data that might be more difficult to plot in 2D, especially when you go to the 3D realms of plotting. What those look like and how to use them. So if you kind of go through this, I think this is really interesting. Now, we did take this portion of it, so this is pretty much a copy paste right from here. But why it's important, right? Visualizing data really helps you often see the information more clearly. I mean, it's just as simple as that. You see the relative values and the impacts of the data. It allows you to kind of organize what the data is. Like you can kind of see it in categories, like especially if it's sorted and you create like a pie chart or a bar chart that's sorted and the information goes from smallest to largest, or like we saw with the COVID data, the big ones were like here and then the lesser ones are over there if you flipped it, right? It also helps you understand if there's any relationships, what the data is composed of, like does it make sense the way it's charting, or do I need to move, you know, from one axis to the other, or like we were playing with the pivot table, like what's in a row, what's in the column, that all has a bearing on this. More importantly is sometimes you can see visually that there's trends that you wouldn't spot by looking at the numbers. That to me is probably the most useful aspect of this. You know, so for example, like with COVID infections, when we were seeing on a chart that it was just going up and up and up, I mean, like I said, that's kind of freaky, right? You know, but it is also very impactful. And the message is, this keeps climbing, it's not leveling off. And what we looked at before was the rate of infections. We weren't even looking at the rates of death, you know, or hospitalization or weird things like that. Those are even freakier, right? But the other thing is that we can see like where data overlaps or if there's trends, right? I like this one too. Like if you have like a piece of data and you see like most of the data fits in here, and we got this one piece of data that's way off in left field here. Why? We call that an outlier. Why is there an anomaly in that data? You know, for example, if we had some country on planet Earth during COVID that didn't get infected, why? Why is that country not getting infected? You know, it's an interesting thing to study. Sometimes we can see from the trends where things are moving. It helps us make predictions very quickly and easily without having to crunch numbers. You can just see a trend line and go, oh, next year it's going to be about here. And you're probably going to be close to right. But maybe, and arguably, this might be the most important piece. And it doesn't even have to be for decision makers, but it tells a more meaningful aspect of the data. It describes something important about it, like why the data is important, or why you should look at it. And let's face it, would you rather look at a picture of the data, or would you rather look at the data? And for most people, they'd rather see the graphic, right, of what's going on. And so that's kind of the value of this. So I would say, if you have time, please go through and read this whole document. It's very useful, and provides a lot of really good information. And once again, those like when to use something, pieces of it are particularly useful, at least in my opinion. All right, we already looked at that one. I apologize. So I'll go on to the next piece here.
Hi, here is an example of scatter plots with different data, different
This is
color.
Christopher, by the way.
So we have height and weight of male and females. One way to do it is I just go in and do an insert, and I'm going to do an insert of a chart. I'll do a scatter plot, like so. It's an empty chart, nothing there, right? Woo, very exciting. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select data, and then I'm going to select add, and first one will be male. That's where the data is there. I'm going to click in this. I'm only going to select about 10 data points just to have for an example. So I'll just do like till 10 right there. And then for Y, I'm going to delete that piece. And then I'm going to select about another 10 data points there, right there. Notice I've got the dots, so everything is being colored right now. Everything's all set. That's there. I'm okay. That brings me back to select my data source. I can now do another add, and if I want to, I can say female, like so. I need to get my X values. I'm going to scroll all the way down to female, so where they are. Here we are, 6,300, and I'm going to select, I don't know, about 10 pieces of data from there. You'll notice how it pre-filled it for me. I'm going to do the same thing with the Y. Again, I'll take 6,300 down to 6,310. Pre-fill that. Okay. I can't scroll up at this moment, so I'm going to just say OK to show you. We're going to come all the way back up, and now you can see my different colors for the different pieces there. Obviously, there's not much, and I can change my plots there if I want to as well. But that's one way to.
So that's just a super quick overview of how to create scatter plots, for example, when you don't have a data range pre-selected. And he also was doing something here. He was just kind of doing like a spot check of data, right? He's not putting all the data up there, because then what happens is most of the data will fit right in that same range here. And then you'll have like 500 little dots all in the same spot, right? Very hard to visualize. But what's kind of fascinating about this is, well, one of these is height. I think this one's height in like centimeters or inches, perhaps. Yeah, probably inches. And this is weight in pounds. And then you notice that most people tend to be taller than 50 inches. So there's like no data down here. So one thing you could do is you could click on the formatting tools for this chart, and you could start your X range at 50. So you're just ignoring all the blank parts. So you can kind of like tweak it like that. Same is true for weight. Like most people don't typically weigh less than 100 pounds, but there are those that do, right? And generally speaking, most people, at least on this data chart here, aren't weighing over 300, but there are people that do, certainly, right? So this is kind of one of the basic approaches, and he has this video in here kind of for our benefit. I'm moving on to the next little thing here, which is basically getting into the exercise. And so what we're going to do is we are going to talk about doing the charting and graphing and starting to complete the exercises, but I am going to do that in a separate video. So I'm going to consider this all the sort of lecture-y stuff. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to get practical here. We're going to start working on this first exercise. You will notice there's 2 exercise sets here. With any luck, we can finish the first one. So this video is going to end here. We'll do kind of like demo and exercise completion in the next video. So this video is over.